Welcome to Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge. What you're about to hear might sound like fiction, but for someone out there, it's the truth they never got to tell. My name is Nancy Everett. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how my family refused to attend my tiny wedding, until they saw what they'd missed. By then, it was too late. I still remember that moment in our Houston apartment like it was tattooed on the inside of my eyelids. The radiator was humming softly, the evening sun casting a gentle golden filter through the curtains. But my hands were ice cold. Because the message I had just read wasn't a typo. It wasn't a joke. It was real. And it broke something in me. Nancy, your dad, and I talked. We're not coming. A wedding that small, honestly, it's not worth flying the whole family to Arizona for. That was it. No apology. No warmth. No emotion. Just cold, clinical rejection from my own mother. I stared at the words again and again, waiting for them to change. They didn't. It felt like someone had quietly pressed a pillow to my chest and kept it there. I couldn't breathe. Before I could even process it, more messages came in like a cruel wave. My older sister Melanie, my younger brother Derek, my Aunt Claudia, and even my two cousins I hadn't seen in years but had still sent engraved invitations to. Every single one of them gave excuses, ranging from just bad timing to we assumed it'd be something informal anyway. Not one of them was coming. Not one. I let the phone fall onto my lap as I stepped out onto our little balcony. Downtown Houston stretched around me, the buildings catching the orange light like torches. But inside me, everything felt gray and heavy. The breeze tangled through my hair, but I was too numb to notice. The sliding glass door opened behind me, and I didn't have to turn. I knew it was him, Zach. My fiancé. My best friend. The only person who had never once made me feel like I needed to earn love by being impressive or useful. He stepped beside me and gently rested his hand on my shoulder. "What's going on, babe?" I didn't answer right away. My voice was buried beneath a lump in my throat. My eyes stung. "No one in my family is coming," I whispered. He didn't react with anger. He didn't try to fix it or say something shallow. He took my phone, scrolled through the messages, and finally exhaled, not in rage, but in quiet, stunned disappointment. "That's brutal," he murmured. "They know how much this means to you." I turned my face away. "They think because we're not renting out a luxury ballroom or inviting 200 guests, it's not real. Like it's just some backyard cookout." He pulled me into his arms. His warmth was the only thing holding me together. "This day is about you and me," he said softly. "Not them. Not anyone else." I cried then, not out of weakness, but out of mourning. I had pictured my mom adjusting my veil. My sister helping with my makeup. My dad walking me down the aisle with that proud twinkle in his eye. Now, none of that would happen. They weren't just skipping my wedding. They were erasing themselves from a memory I'd carry forever. And the worst part? It wasn't out of spite. It was out of indifference. Later that night, I sat on our bed, the leather-bound wedding notebook in my lap. I had spent almost a year filling it with love and detail, floral arrangements, color palettes, catering notes, seating plans. My family's names were right at the top of the guest list. Each one was now crossed out in red ink. As if they were dead to the day itself. I looked over at the corner of our closet where my dress hung in its ivory box. A custom design from a boutique in Los Angeles, hand-stitched Italian lace, hundreds of tiny crystals, a 10-foot train that shimmered like moonlight when I first tried it on. It wasn't bought for show. It was bought with belief. Belief in the day. Belief in family. Zach walked in with 2 mugs of tea and sat across from me, resting a hand on mine. "I spoke to the lighting team," he said. "They're setting up the motion sensors and framing the walkway by Monday." I nodded. My voice was quiet. Will the lights still change color to match the music? He smiled gently. Of course. And the quartz tiles for the dance floor arrived too. I wondered, would my sister still call this a small wedding if she saw it now? Would my mother still say it wasn't worth the flight? Then Zach said something that shifted everything. I think it's time you knew something. I blinked, confused. Knew what? He reached into the drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were documents, contracts, bank statements, legal agreements. Remember that app one was working on in Austin? The secure messaging platform for healthcare workers? I nodded slowly. 3 months after we moved to Houston, a tech firm bought it for $6 million. I stared at him. Speechless. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my mom. I didn't want it to turn into a bragfest. I didn't want our wedding to become a transaction. Tears pooled in my eyes again, but not from sadness. From awe. From love. From realizing that I had chosen right. That the man I was marrying wasn't just brilliant, he was grounded. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. The rejection from my family? It wasn't about location or budget. It was about them never believing in me. Never seeing me as someone worth showing up for unless they got something out of it, photos, clout, gossip, status. They didn't come because they didn't think it would matter. But it would. Oh, it would. Not because I planned to prove anything. But because the truth, wrapped in love, sealed with beauty, and posted in silence, would speak louder than any invite they had thrown away. And they wouldn't be able to take their decision back. Zach sat quietly beside me as I turned over the weight of what he had just revealed. $6 million. And he never once mentioned it. Not even when I panicked about the cost of the crystal chandeliers. Not even when I cried over whether we should cancel the imported silk napkins to save money. You let me think we were stretching every dime, I whispered. We were, he said softly. Because the day needed to be built with intention, not ego. I wanted you to plan this wedding the way you wanted it. Not to impress your family. Not to prove anything. Just because you deserved to have the day you imagined. I covered my face with my hands and let out a shaky breath. They won't care about that. All they'll see are the photos. All they'll say is, why didn't you tell us it was like this? Zach's expression hardened in a way I rarely saw. Then that's on them. You invited them with your whole heart. They declined with their whole ego. We sat in silence for a while after that. The hum of city traffic outside our window sounded distant, like another life. A part of me still longed to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone would change their mind. That my mom would surprise me and show up at the resort. That my sister Melanie would call, voice trembling, and say she was sorry. But 3 days later, while I was at my final dress fitting, a message came in. It was from Melanie. Honestly, Nancy, if you wanted us there so badly, you should have picked a location that wasn't in the middle of nowhere. Not everyone wants to fly to a desert for a micro-wedding. Right below it came a message from my mother. You've made this more difficult than it needed to be. It feels like you're shutting us out with all the secrecy and remote planning. It's hard to support something that doesn't feel inclusive. I stared at my phone as if it had grown teeth. These weren't just excuses. These were attacks, cloaked in victimhood. I hadn't made things hard. I had sent every detail months in advance. I'd created hotel lists, car service instructions, customized welcome kits. I had bent over backwards to make it easy. And yet, somehow, I was now the villain in my own wedding story. That night, Zach found me in the dark living room, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hand and tear stains on my cheeks. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat beside me, took my phone, read the messages, and held my hand. They're rewriting the story because they feel guilty, he said. I looked at him, voice hoarse. But they're not even apologizing. They're not ready to face what they missed. That's why they're flipping the blame. I let out a bitter laugh. It's just like growing up. If I succeeded, it was luck. If I failed, it was my fault. If I wanted something simple, I was selfish. If I wanted something beautiful, I was shallow. Zach's grip tightened. You're not selfish. And this wedding, what we're building, isn't small. It's sacred. I clung to those words like a lifeline. When the wedding week arrived, we flew out to Sedona early to meet the final vendors. The moment we touched down, the red rock cliffs greeted us like quiet gods. The air felt ancient and warm, humming with a kind of reverence. It was everything I had dreamed of. Serene. Natural. Intimate. The resort sat on the edge of a cliff, with views that stretched over Verde Valley. Our ceremony platform was already being constructed, imported granite tiles laid down in perfect symmetry, surrounded by hundreds of white lilies and wild roses. A steel arch, shaped like a delicate crown, would stand at the edge, framing the sky. And still, not a single call from my family. Only Emily, my youngest sister at 23, had remained silent, not hurtful, not kind. Just absent. I wondered where her silence stood. Whether it meant hesitation, or quiet agreement with the others. I didn't have the energy to ask. The night before the wedding, Rachel, my best friend and maid of honor, sat with me on the suite balcony, sipping wine under the stars. They're going to see it, you know, she said. I didn't answer. They're going to see the photos. The videos. The warmth in the guests' eyes. And they're going to realize they weren't just absent. They were wrong. I looked down at my hands. Will that make it better? Rachel leaned closer. No. But it'll make it clear. I nodded. Because that was all I wanted now. Not revenge. Not apologies. Just clarity. To let the world see what love looks like. Not flashy love. Not performative love. Real, reverent, hard-earned love. The morning of the wedding, I rose before the sun. My dress shimmered in the early light like it was made of frost and fire. I stood by the window, looking down at the platform where I'd walked to Zach, and something inside me settled. They had chosen not to come. But I had chosen joy anyway. When the music began and I stepped out into the sunlit path, I felt no shame. No longing. Only the wind. Only his eyes at the end of the aisle. Only the beginning of something they would never get to rewrite. The sun poured over the cliffs like a blessing as I stood behind the white drape, moments before the music began. I could see Zach waiting at the altar, his posture straight but hands fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve, the way he always did when he was overwhelmed. And yet, when our eyes met across the distance, he stilled. Just like that, the world went quiet. Rachel adjusted the long, glistening train of my dress behind me. Nancy, she whispered, you're not walking alone. You've got every good thing you've ever fought for right in front of you. I nodded. My throat too tight for words. The ceremony began. 30 guests rose to their feet, colleagues, neighbors, my former literature professor, a few close friends from our nonprofit work. Not a single blood relative. But each face smiled with sincerity. Each heart beat with presence. No one was here for show. As I stepped onto the stone path, motion sensor lights pulsed gently underfoot, shifting in hue to match the soft chords of the string quartet playing the melody Zach once said reminded him of me. Every detail had been carefully chosen, not for spectacle, but for meaning. When I reached him, Zach's eyes shimmered. His voice cracked slightly when he whispered, "You're here." I squeezed his hand. "So are you." The officiant's words felt like poetry. The sky above us stretched wide and cloudless, and the red rocks stood witness like ancient friends. When we exchanged vows, I couldn't stop the tears. Not because I was sad, but because I had finally reached the other side of every dismissal, every eye roll, every moment in my life when I was told I was too emotional, too dramatic, too much. This moment, this man, this love, none of it was too anything. It was just right. When the final I do fell from our lips, and Zach kissed me with the gentleness of someone who knew exactly what I'd been through to stand beside him, the guests erupted into applause. I looked out over the canyon and felt something rise in my chest, not triumph. Not revenge. Just peace. The reception unfolded in a grand glass hall overlooking the valley. The ceiling twinkled with Venetian crystal chandeliers. A long table, draped in ivory silk and lined with hand-calligraphed place cards, stretched down the center of the room. Each card held a small handwritten note, a memory, a thank you, a piece of our journey. No one left the table without knowing why they mattered to us. A French chef from New York had flown in to prepare a 7-course meal, each dish paired with a rare wine from Zach's private collection. It wasn't about showing off. It was about honoring what we'd built. What we had quietly sacrificed for. I raised my glass of champagne, vintage, imported, ridiculously expensive, and looked around the room. Thank you, I said. For being here. For knowing that a wedding isn't measured by guest count, but by the heart that created it. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "If your mother could see this." I shook my head gently. She will. Just not the way she imagined. Around 10 p.m., the celebration moved outdoors to the custom-built dance floor, made of hand-cut stone lit from beneath with shifting LED lights. The first song played, the one Zach and I had danced to in his tiny Austin apartment back when our dinner was ramen and our couch was secondhand. We danced like no one was watching. But I knew everyone was. And I didn't mind. Because no one was judging. At 2 a.m., Zach took my hand and led me away from the group toward the open field behind the venue. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready for what?" He didn't answer. Just nodded toward the sky. A soft boom echoed in the night. Then a burst of gold bloomed across the stars. Fireworks, elegant, orchestral, breathtaking. Not just random sparks, but a synchronized show set to music. Music I recognized. "That's the piece you once said felt like your heart when you saw me," I said. He smiled. "And now it's ours." Behind us, our guests clapped and cheered. I stood there, veil billowing behind me, hand in his, tears slipping down my cheeks. Not from sadness. But from something deeper. Completion. I looked up at the sky, at the gold turning into silver, into violet, into flame. I thought of my mother. My sister. The empty spaces where they could have stood. And I knew in that moment, they'd never get this back. No photo. No caption. No apology would ever give them the warmth of that night, the way my soul had unfolded. But soon, they would see it. 3 weeks later, Zach and I were curled on our blue velvet couch, flipping through the wedding album our photographer had hand-delivered. The first photo stopped me cold. The kiss. The veil catching the last golden light of day. My eyes half closed. His fingers tangled in mine. It didn't look like a memory. It looked like a dream. "She sent the draft to the magazine, too," Zach said, sipping tea. "And I think, it's time." I raised an eyebrow. "Time for what?" "Plan B." I laughed. "You mean, posting the photos?" He nodded slowly. "Not to prove anything. Just to let them see what they turned their backs on." A part of me hesitated. But then I flipped to the next page, our candlelit dinner, the guests laughing, me touching Zach's face under the chandelier glow. Just 3 photos, we agreed. One of the ceremony. One of the dinner. One of the dance. No captions. No explanations. Let the silence do the talking. The next morning, I posted them on Instagram with a single line. "A month ago, I married the kindest man I've ever known." It was small. It was perfect. Hashtag intimate wedding, hashtag no filter needed. And then I turned off my phone and made coffee. It didn't stay quiet long. Within 45 minutes, the texts started. Abby, WTF? You had a wedding like that? Why didn't anyone say? Julia, I would have gone if I knew it was so, wow. Why hide it? And my mother, 3 missed calls. Zach took one look at the voicemail transcript and handed me the phone. She's not sorry, he said. She's just shocked. They all are. But not for the right reasons. I nodded. Because now they weren't mourning missing me. They were mourning missing the photo op. By noon, the comments under my wedding post had already crossed 100. Friends from college. Former coworkers. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them had nothing but awe and kindness to offer. Nancy, this looks like something out of a Vogue bridal shoot. That veil shot? Literal magic. Whoever missed this day missed everything. But the messages from family were different. My cousin Rachel, who'd replied too busy when I sent the invite, now wrote. Wait, this was the small wedding? I can't believe we weren't told how stunning it would be. As if my love and my marriage only mattered once it was dipped in gold and wrapped in aesthetics. As if their RSVP would have changed had I led with a dollar amount instead of a heartfelt invite. Then, late that afternoon, another voicemail from my mother. Nancy. Call me immediately. I don't understand why you would go through with such a production and not say anything. You've made us look heartless. That last line hit me like a slap. Made them look heartless? They did that all on their own. I didn't answer. I just handed the phone to Zach and went to the kitchen. I needed space, not just from them, but from the ache that lingered even in the beauty of everything we'd built. Because even surrounded by elegance and love, rejection still echoes in the hollow parts of your chest. That evening, Zach joined me on the balcony with a mug of tea. The sun was setting, casting the city in that same warm glow we'd shared in Sedona. I leaned into his shoulder. They're scrambling, I whispered. He nodded. Because they didn't think you'd do something grand without them. They didn't think I could. That's their mistake. The next day, my mother called again. And this time, I picked up. I put her on speaker, sat beside Zach, and let her voice fill the room. Can you explain, she snapped, why you staged a wedding like that and acted like it was no big deal? I closed my eyes for a second, then said, what exactly do you want explained? You've made everyone think we abandoned you. I almost laughed. You did abandon me. That's not fair. You didn't tell us it was that elaborate. And if I had, would you have come? I asked sharply. There was a long pause. I just thought it was going to be quiet, she muttered. It was quiet, I replied. Quiet, beautiful, sacred. You just assumed it wasn't worth your time. Her voice softened, but I didn't let it sway me. Nancy, you're being unfair now. No, I said calmly. I'm being honest. You didn't believe in me. You thought I was exaggerating. That I couldn't pull off something meaningful. And now that you've seen the photos, you're not sad because you missed me. You're sad because you missed it. I ended the call before she could reply. Zach didn't say anything. He just reached out, held my hand, and looked at me like I'd just set something right. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Emily, my youngest sister. 23. Quiet. Gentle. The only one who hadn't texted, liked, commented, or judged. She stood there in jeans and a gray hoodie, holding a box of pastries and a crumpled envelope. I didn't call because I was afraid you wouldn't let me in, she mumbled. I stepped aside. The room felt still as she walked in. She placed the pastries on the coffee table and then pulled the old wedding invitation out of her bag. I kept this, she said softly. I thought. It's just going to be something small. Maybe next time. But after I saw the photos, the video, it wasn't the luxury that got me. It was how present everyone looked. How sacred it felt. Like it mattered. And I missed that. She looked at me, eyes red. Mom told me you did it to exclude us. But I realized she was wrong. I sat down across from her, silent. Emily's lip trembled. You invited everyone. And no one saw the value. I'm sorry. Truly. She reached into her bag again and handed me a second envelope. I want to organize something. Not a party. Just a gathering. So they can see. So maybe they'll have the guts to say what I'm saying now. I blinked. You'd do that? She nodded. Because you shouldn't have to carry the weight of their choices alone. I looked at Zach, who had just stepped in from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water. He watched me closely, waiting. I exhaled. Not because everything was suddenly healed. But because for once, someone had shown up. And that meant something. We planned it for the following Saturday. No labels. No grand invites. Just a chance. A gathering in our living room. Pastries. A few drinks. The wedding video cued on the screen. A space to stop pretending. The apartment felt too quiet that morning. Not the comfortable, peaceful kind of quiet Zach and I had built together. No, this was the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting to see which way the moment will break. Emily arrived first, a little early, balancing a wildflower bouquet in one hand and a homemade apple pie in the other. Her nervous energy filled the room, but it wasn't unwelcome. It felt honest. She arranged the flowers in a mason jar, then looked at me as she placed the pie on the table. You okay? She asked. I gave her a faint smile. And you? She shrugged. Let's just see if they show up. And they did. One by one. First, my father. He arrived in slacks and a collared shirt that still held the creases from being hastily pulled from the dry cleaner. He held a thin envelope in his hand and looked at me as if he had walked into a space he no longer recognized. He didn't say much, just pulled me into a hug and whispered, I should have been there. I didn't answer. I just squeezed his hand gently and led him inside. Then Melanie came in, flanked by her husband and 2 kids. She smiled too quickly, too brightly, clearly rehearsed. Zach offered her a drink, which she accepted without meeting my eyes. My brother Derek walked in a few minutes later with his girlfriend, awkward and stiff. No one brought up the elephant in the room. And finally, my mother. She stood outside the apartment with Julia and Grace, the 3 of them hesitating like teenagers unsure if they'd been invited to the party after all. Emily opened the door before I could. Hi, Mom, she said softly. Come in. I didn't greet them. I simply gestured toward the living room where the chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the television. Pastries. Drinks. Silence. My mother's eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on the framed wedding photo on the wall, me and Zach under the sunset sky, his hand wrapped around my waist, my veil caught midair like a blessing from the wind. It's cozy, she said, her voice brittle. Thanks, I replied. I turned to Zach. Let's play it. He nodded, grabbed the remote, and hit play. The room fell into a hush as the screen lit up with the first images. My walk down the aisle between 2 rows of white roses. The breeze rustling my dress. Zach's eyes glimmering with tears. Our vows. Our kiss. The sunset. The guests' laughter at dinner. The clink of glasses. The violin quartet under the chandeliers. And then the fireworks. That final burst of golden light. The music Zach had chosen. The silence that followed. When it ended, I turned off the screen. No one spoke. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room, vibrating faintly through the stillness like a metronome counting the seconds people needed to figure out what to say. Then my mother stood. Her face was flushed, not with anger, but with something rawer. Guilt. Maybe even regret. "Nancy," she began, her voice low but steady. "At first, I really believed you were trying to shut us out. That you didn't want us there." I didn't interrupt. But watching that, she inhaled sharply. I realized I was the one who stepped away. "You invited me, clearly, beautifully. And I let my judgment cloud everything. I didn't believe in what you were building. I didn't believe in you." Her voice cracked on the last word. I sat still, hands in my lap. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Not because I missed a grand wedding, but because I didn't cherish your day the way a mother should have." And for once, I believed her. Not because the apology was perfect, but because it wasn't polished. It was real. Julia stepped forward next. She pulled an envelope from her purse. "I said some awful things," she admitted. "I mocked your choices. Then I tried to blame you when it turned out I was wrong. This is for you." Later, I'd open the letter and find not just words, but 2 old photos, me and her as kids, in princess costumes playing fake weddings in the backyard. Grace didn't say much. She just hugged me tightly and whispered, "Next time, I want to be there." And that was enough. By the time the gathering ended, the atmosphere had shifted. No one pretended nothing had happened anymore. There were no sudden embraces, no magical repairs. But the silence had broken. The denial had been cut through with honest voices. Zach stood beside me as everyone filtered out, his hand resting gently on my back. "How do you feel?" he asked. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But I told the truth. "Finally," I said, "someone showed up for me." 6 months passed. Not everything was suddenly warm and whole between us all, but something had changed. The silence was no longer weaponized. The absence no longer ignored. My mother started texting me once a week. Nothing profound, sometimes it was just a photo of her garden or a random forwarded recipe she thought I might like. It was clumsy, awkward, but I could tell she was trying to stitch something back together, thread by fragile thread. Julia sent me pictures of dishes she'd begun experimenting with, like the lemon risotto she burned twice, or the tiramisu that turned out perfect. And Grace, she sent me a yoga class schedule one Friday night with the message, "Would be cool to try this together." It wasn't much, but from her, it meant everything. But it was Emily who became the quiet bridge. She didn't try to fix things. She didn't pick sides. She didn't force anyone to move faster than they were ready. But she never stopped being present. She'd drop by with a new book or a box of strawberries, or just to sit on the balcony and talk about nothing. Zach said once, "She's the thread keeping it from unraveling again." I couldn't disagree. By June, Zach brought up something gently over dinner one evening as we sat in our new backyard, the one that came with the little Scottsdale home we bought after he officially left his old tech job to grow his startup. "How about a small dinner to celebrate our first anniversary?" he said. "Nothing fancy. Just family, a few friends, and good food." I hesitated. Not out of fear, but because the idea of gathering them again, of giving them another glimpse into this life, felt like both an opportunity and a risk. But Zach, with his calm eyes and steady hand, never suggested anything unless he truly believed it was worth doing. So I said yes. We strung soft lights across the trees, set a long table with white linen, and placed sprigs of dried lavender atop each napkin. We didn't hire a caterer. We ordered our favorite pasta dishes from the Italian restaurant down the street and made a massive salad ourselves. I baked a chocolate tart. Zach made lemonade. It was simple. Quiet. Honest. And right at 6 p.m., they came. Every one of them. My mother brought a lemon mousse cake she had baked herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. She looked at me and, hesitantly, asked, "Can I help pour the drinks?" I nodded. And in that moment, I understood it was her second apology. The one not spoken with words, but with presence. With action. Dinner unfolded under a soft golden sunset. The kids ran barefoot across the grass with glow bracelets. Zach told stories about our trip to Greece, our second honeymoon, a quiet getaway 3 months after the wedding. My father offered a toast that was awkward but sincere. And when dessert was served, I stood up, holding my glass, and gently tapped it to gather their attention. "Tonight," I said, "we're not just celebrating 1 year of marriage. We're celebrating something that should have always been here, presence." The table fell silent. My mother looked down at her hands. Julia looked directly at me. Then my mom stood. She looked around the backyard, at the lights, at the food, at the people, and said, "Nancy, if there's one thing I've learned in the past year, it's that love doesn't always look the way we expect. I judged your wedding because I thought small meant insignificant. But I was wrong. I forgot that what matters is not the scale of the event, but the effort behind it. The intention." She looked at me, eyes clear. "You went the distance. You invited us. You gave us a seat. And we didn't come. But you gave us another chance, and for that, I'm grateful." Julia added softly, "Your wedding wasn't small. It just felt that way to those of us who didn't bother to look deeper." Zach stepped beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder. I looked around. No fireworks. No violin quartet. No imported marble or designer gowns. Just people who were finally trying. Not to make up for everything, but to move forward in truth. And that was enough. As the night wore on, the backyard glowed under string lights swaying gently in the summer breeze. The kids, Melanie's twins and Derek's daughter, ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter rising like fireflies in the dusk. I sat beside Zach, our hands quietly laced together, watching the very people who once left an aching void in our wedding slowly mend that space, not with fanfare, but with their presence. We cut the lemon mousse cake my mother had brought. She stood next to Zach as he plated the slices, then turned to him and said something I never expected to hear. "Thank you, for not giving up on this family." Zach looked at her, his expression soft but clear. "I just did what was best for Nancy." I turned away slightly to hide the smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't pride. It was relief. After everything, I wasn't just seen. I was defended. We lit a few citronella candles as the night deepened. Julia helped Grace pick up glasses from the table without anyone asking. My dad offered to take the trash out, something I had never seen him volunteer to do in my entire life. These small gestures would have gone unnoticed in another time, but now they shimmered in my heart like gold threads in a tapestry that had once been torn. And as I looked around at everyone gathered, family who had once shamed me for making different choices, people who accused me of selfishness and secrecy, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not because everything had been forgiven. Not because the past had disappeared. But because I didn't need the apologies to be dramatic. I just needed them to be real. I stood, raised my glass, and spoke the words that had waited in my chest since Sedona. I used to think a wedding felt small when the guest list was small. But now I understand, what makes a wedding feel small is the absence of those who are supposed to love you the most. I paused, scanning the table, locking eyes with each face, some smiling, some teary, some simply listening. You didn't come because you didn't believe it was worth attending. And that hurt. Deeply. But tonight, you showed up. And not for photos. Not for social media. Not for appearance. You showed up because maybe, you finally understood what it meant to be part of this chapter in my life. Zach stood beside me and gently raised his glass too. To presence, I said. To the quiet, the real, the earned. We clinked glasses. No one spoke for a moment. But the silence was no longer heavy. It was full. Later that night, as the last guests left and the kids fell asleep curled up on patio chairs, I sat beside Zach with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The moon hung low above the rooftops, silver and still. "I don't need a second wedding," I said softly. Zach smiled, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Because they finally showed up?" I shook my head. "Because we already had the perfect one. We didn't need marble floors or chandeliers anymore to prove anything. We didn't need to post photos or explain. What we had that day on the cliffside in Sedona was real. And what we had tonight, under simple lights, with pie and paper cups, was healing. Not every crack in a family gets fixed. Some stay. Some you learn to live around. But tonight, I saw the first stitches. The first effort. The first signs that what had broken might, over time, find its shape again. My name is Nancy Everett. And I learned something that day under the blazing red sky in Sedona: love doesn't need witnesses to be sacred. But healing does. Sometimes, revenge isn't loud. Sometimes, it's letting the people who doubted you see you, thriving, loved, fulfilled, and letting that silence speak for itself. Thank you for watching my story on Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge. If you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or excluded, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more powerful stories that remind us, presence matters more than spectacle.